Kamen Rider Saber has its ups and downs, but I can definitely say that one of my favorite parts of the show is the incredibly unique take on transformation devices with the Seikens. Instead of belts, the heroes transform using swords. While each Seiken has a unique design, usage of the Wonder Ride books, and elemental inspiration, they somehow manage to be unified by utilizing the same naming pattern, similarly structured jingles, and an incorporation of each rider's visor and sword crown. No matter how crazy or unique the swords get, these components are always retained in some way, creating some fantastic imagery that really solidifies the underlying uniformity of this show. And that's why I spent all of my money on the Saber toy line, and why today I'm going to be ranking all of the Seikens from Kamen Rider Saber from worst to best in my opinion. Since I have all the toys, I figured in addition to factoring in the usual stuff like how they look and the sounds, I might as well also focus on ranking them as physical items, toys, and stuff like that. I know Jem at Pronghorn Heroes has already done a ranking, but it's a little bit different from this video, so because I mentioned in it, I think you should definitely go check that video out before or after this one. Also, you should check out my other videos. I've done tons of Saber videos, but I've also more specifically done a bunch of unboxings on all the swords, all of them that I'll be looking at in this video. So if you want to see my first impressions on any of the stuff, make sure you check out those videos, and also don't forget to let me know your own ranking down in the comment section. Coming in last place is one of the only Seikens I don't have. It's right here, the Rumeiken Kyomu. And if you've tuned into some of my live streams, you pretty much get the whole reasoning behind this. I hate this thing. That's why I don't have it. Now, the colors are fine, Falcon is fine. It's the whole conceptual part of it that I really do not like at all. The blade part itself, the actual Seiken, isn't actually like unique. It doesn't do anything different or special. It's just a black sword driver with a new emblem on it. It just needed to be a sword driver with a new emblem. You use a new book with it, and if you really wanted to, you could sell like the other piece that attaches to it, and then it completes the look. But it didn't need to be a whole other belt, a whole other sword, because it just doesn't do anything. This could probably be like where the fact I'm buying these and I'm ranking them as toys comes in, because I just didn't buy this one because I didn't like it as a toy. So as a toy, it just does not work for me at all. So it comes in at the very bottom spot. From here on out, I actually like all of these Seikens. It's just the Kyomu I hate. Number 11, the Hayate, I actually do enjoy. It's a little bit of the opposite of the Kyomu, where visually, I don't think it's amazing. It's kind of like two ugly shades of green. The book slot is kind of like a big tumor and doesn't look very good. It's also kind of a small toy, but a lot of these are small toys. But conceptually is where I really enjoy this thing. It's basically the idea that to transform, you rip the sword in half. So it's actually like a Seiken with two swords. One has the emblem, one has the book. And I mean, it's very simply, how cool is it to have a sword that when you split it in half, it activates the transformation. It has a shuriken mode for the ninja, but it can also split into two swords, so that, I mean, I guess it's a ninja. I don't know, ninjas use two swords, but they're also like considered part of the one sword. So it's just really cool. It's kind of a stupid thing, like, oh, I split it in half, I transform. But it's so cool. Now we have our first honorable mention, the King Excalibur. The reason it's an honorable mention is because it's technically not actually a Seiken. It doesn't have the Seiken name. It doesn't fit all of that criteria. It's just not used with the rider. But it kind of functions as a Seiken within the world of Saber because it's a sword, but then it has a robot mode, which is kind of intended to be the rider form, or the rider associated with the sword, because it has the sword crown like that. And then when the riders use it, they don't get the face piece, which is what happens when riders use other base form books. So it's kind of like a Seiken, but it's not really a Seiken. For that fact, it's really cool. I think also just the fact it's a sword that turns into a robot is really badass. Bringing us into the top 10 is the Ankokuken Kurayami. Right off the bat, what really drags this one down on the list is just the toy. I am ranking them as toys, and the toy just kind of feels really dinky. Like, I know, again, they're all small. I am going to kind of bring it up a lot, but it's especially prevalent with this one because the reader bit is like not part of the blade, or it kind of blocks out the blade, so it kind of feels like this is the only blade part and this is all like hilt. Like, I don't feel very excited to swing this thing around. In addition to that, the functionality is really disappointing because it is like a whole other driver sword essentially. It's got a scanner, but it doesn't really do anything with that. It just says the name of the book a little bit differently when you scan it, and other than that, that's it. Like, at least a little bit of a different jingle would have been nice, but no, it's just kind of a disappointing toy. Now, in the show, it's really badass. The colors are really cool. The gold and purple is not a color scheme I would have ever imagined, but it's a really cool color scheme. It really works well. I like the idea of the emblem being a bit different. It's not chromed out like the others, but it's got like these screw bolts on it, so it kind of feels like it's like trapped version of the other Seikens, I guess, which is really interesting. It makes this feel like a dark weapon that it's like looks like a possessed version of the other swords. So kind of a disappointing toy, but if you can move past that, I think it's a really cool Seiken. A step up from the Kurayami just so happens to be its direct opposite in the Seikens, the Kogoken Psycho. This thing just has so many unique ideas and concepts, which incorporate into just how interesting and cool it looks. One of the big factors is that it parallels the sword driver's whole, functionality. Instead of taking a sword and pulling it out of a belt, you've got a belt which just looks like the entire sword, and it basically is, because then you just pull out the entire sword for the whole thing to work. It's not just a sheath, it's the whole sword, and I think that's kind of interesting. Then it's got the best Wonder Ride book implementation of all the other riders, where it turns the book into a dude, the rider form of Kamen Rider Psycho visually. And like, even if you take away the concept where this is Psycho, it's still visually super cool to just have the sword have a rider there. It has a shorter blade than the Kurayami, I feel, but because where the whole hilt is just making a person, it's not really like empty space, I don't really care. It's like the design of the Seiken is really cool because it's the design of a rider. And then in addition to that, this piece that gets left over is the same buckle piece that the Kurayami uses. So there's this awesome connection between the light and dark Seikens where they have the same buckle piece, but then the next step up is this buckle piece is used for the upgrade. So there's just so much functionality to this as a toy. So it basically all ties together as a super cool Seiken with super cool ideas that just look super cool. We go from one gray Seiken to another gray Seiken with the Dogokuken Gekido. Now this thing is definitely really plain compared to the other Seikens. It's pretty much just entirely gray. But because of that, that's why I really like it. The gray lets the orange really stand out. So this orange blade just kind of glows, even though there's no lights in the toy. It just really glows as a blade. But also this is definitely a case where I think the show prop contributes to my opinion of the toy, because obviously in the show, this is like the biggest transformation device ever committed to Kamen Rider. It's taller than him, I think. So that's just really awesome. And I feel that the toy really brings that across. Like, obviously nowhere close to the actual size in the show, but it is one of the bigger Seikens, one of the bigger toys ever released, and it definitely gives you this cool feeling when you swing it around. The handle as well is nice and big, so it really like gives you that weightiness to holding it. So while the toy is very dinky, I just think the concept of this thing as a weapon, as a transformation device in the show definitely helps my opinion of the toy, and I just think it's really awesome. In contrast to the dullness of the Gekido, we have the pizzazz of the Onjuken Suzune. The bright colors are definitely what makes this thing so exciting. It's just bright pink. I prefer the bright pink over the dark gray. That's just, that's very simple. The baby blue accents aren't something I would have ever considered utilizing on, like, with a pink color scheme, but it works really well. It really gives that pop to the whole aesthetic, especially with this bit where you have it sneaking up into the blade. Gives the blade some nice detail that connects into the sword, and even the emblem. It's like this energy wave going up to the blade. But a big factor that brings this up so high is the gun functionality. So sword guns are everywhere in Kamen Rider, but I've never seen a sword gun gimmick so unique, where the blade just splits in half and rotates down, and there's not even like a barrel piece here, because the idea is it's like a rail gun. It's like, I don't know, it gives it this futuristic aesthetic that not only it like makes it very distinct among the Saber toys, but also just distinct among a lot of Kamen Rider toys. There's even this really cool audio wave pattern here, which just adds to the whole vibe of this thing. There's even small details like how the utilization of the Wonder Ride books for attacks is like loading it like a magazine. That's super badass. So it's a cool sword as well, but definitely the fact it turns into a gun, the size of the gun, just everything it does with this gun mode is what puts it in this place on the list. If it wasn't a gun, I don't know where it would place. It would just kind of be a normal Seiken, but with the gun, it's really badass. Next up is another honorable mention, and this is another toy that I don't own, but the reason I don't own it is because they never made it. It's the Kaladbolg? I don't know, here's the name. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. They never said it in the show, but it's the Kamen Rider Solomon sword. And it's simply put, it's essentially everything I liked about the King of Arthur, except I think the colors are really, really cool. The gold, red, black is such a hot color scheme. Although, to be fair, I don't know if I would have gotten it if they even made it, because it's just a repaint of a thing that doesn't even have that many sounds in the first place. So, I don't know, maybe I would have never had it here to swing around or whatever, but it's still a really cool looking sword. Now in the actual number 6 place, we have the Eneiken Noroshi. This I think has my favorite color scheme out of all of the Seikens. It's all red, it's an all red Seiken, so automatically I love it. But then it's got gold, I love red and gold, and then it's got some bits of silver to, you know, lighten the mood. But lighten the mood? But the red and the gold work so beautifully together that I just love looking at this. Design wise, it's pretty neat as well. I really like the use of a hand guard to incorporate both the emblem and the element. And then it's also kind of cool that we have this whole steampunk aesthetic, because the element is also like kind of steam, smoke, steam, same thing. So the steampunk aesthetic ties into steam in a way that I probably wouldn't have ever considered using for a sword toy. But speaking of it as a sword toy, it's just a really cool toy as well. It's got some unique functionality where it actually is the only solo Seiken, or one of the only solo Seikens, to have a Wonder Rider sound effect, where you can use the other books and give it a different jingle. So that's really cool. The blade doesn't feel that short. It actually feels decent length. And there may be a little bit of bias because of the person that uses this Seiken and the appearances it's had in other media. Bringing us into the top 5, but also spots number 4 and 3, is the Suiseiken Nagare, the Raimeiken Ikazuchi, and the Kainken Reka. Since I'm talking about all the Seikens individually, I figured I should give them all their individual spots, but I am going to be talking about them all as a group as the Seiken Sword Driver. The placements are basically just based off of the emblems, where this one's just alright. I like the size of this one, and this one is red. So the Seiken Sword Driver. Visually, it's fine. You know, there's nothing too amazing about it. This is present on all the Seikens, but I am going to bring it up here. I love the use of Rider Emoji for all of the little details on these swords, because it's this unique language within the world of the show, and it gives them all this unique life. I believe for this one, it tells you to pull the sword out. And that is why this is so high. The functionality of the Sword Driver is why I love this thing. Just the basic concept that to transform into a Kamen Rider, you wear the belt, and instead of like pushing a button or doing whatever, you just pull out a sword, and now you have your weapon as a Kamen Rider, and your belt is so cool to me. It's such a simple but awesome idea. I love the concept of that. And then you add in the Wonder Ride books to the whole thing, where you put a book in, and then not only do you transform by pulling out a sword and you're doing all your stuff, but you open this little book which has a picture of your rider form. I don't know, it's so cool. And then the fact you can put in multiple books, and then you just get some whole entirely unique image while you're just pulling a sword out of a belt, and then it makes all the transformation sounds. This is why I bought all of these Saber swords, why I love a lot of Kamen Rider Saber, why I bought into this whole thing. It looks cool, It's got little unique concepts that connect to the show, and then just as a toy, it's so much fun to use. You pull out the sword, like the sound of pulling out the sword is so badass. I love the Seiken sword driver, and that's why it's at number 5 and number 3. It's just that good. Coming in at the number 2 spot is the Jikokuken Kaiji. Now, once again, the key element with this is just the unique and amazing functionality. What's a step up from unsheathing a sword from a belt to transform into a Kamen Rider? Grabbing a sword at the blade, pulling the blade off, and turning it around, and then reinserting it to become a trident? It's like mind-boggling in the best way possible. And it's also super cool as a way to fit in with the time element, you know, the element of time. How do you represent time as an element, as a toy? I mean, how do you represent that with a sword? You make the blade spin. Like, you make the blade the hands of a clock. So every time you transform or you're doing these mode switches, it's like you're twisting the hands of a clock. You're twisting the hands of time every time you transform, and that's badass. The Masho functionality, where it pauses time when you pull this out, and you're just holding the blade of your trident sword, like you're literally holding time in your hand as you're moving through time. It's like, it makes so much sense, but like, who would have ever thought of that? I mean, someone clearly thought of that, and I hope they got a raise. But the other thing is, I think this is the most satisfying toy. As a sword, this is my favorite sword to use. It just feels the closest to the actual prop in the show, so it's so satisfying to just swing around or just hold in your hands. Like, it feels like you're actually holding a real sword from Kamen Rider Saber. But also, the other satisfying bit is just transforming, like just taking that piece out, reinserting it, or not even transforming, just playing with this as a toy, switching between the modes is so satisfying. Add a Wonder Ride book into the mix, and then it's just like, it opens when I reinsert this trident device. The clicks, the clacks of using it as a toy, swinging it as a toy, it's just so much fun to use. It's such a fun toy. This is definitely placed here because as a toy, it's just my favorite toy of the Seikens, pretty much. But it's not my favorite overall Seiken, because coming in at the number 1 spot as my favorite of the Kamen Rider Saber Seikens is the Haoken Cross Saber. This takes everything I love about the Kamen Rider Saber toy lines, the Kamen Rider Saber Seikens, even the Kamen Rider Saber show, and just puts it into one little device. Along the blade, it's got the emblem symbols of each Seiken. So it's literally got this visual harnessing of all the Seikens. It's not just like, yeah, I mean, they told us it has all the Seikens, so I guess it does. No, it literally, you can look right at it and you're like, oh, it has all their symbols on it. I guess it does use all their powers. Then the sounds themselves, of course, also just say all the Seiken names. And the best part too is it doesn't say their whole name. It says the secondary half of the name, which is the elemental parts. But it's also the fact it's not just harnessing like all of these different gimmicks that our hero had to collect throughout the show. It's harnessing all of these transformation devices within the show. Each Seiken, another rider's transformation device. So it's a transformation device that uses other transformation devices essentially and can summon them as a transformation device. At one point, some of the swords were the brand new sword toy. It's the new hot thing. But this takes it and is like, oh yeah, that's just another part of my arsenal. And that's so cool to me. So as an individual Seiken, it's really awesome. I actually really hope they make a 1-to-1 scale of this thing, because I would actually totally buy it, because it would just be so cool to have this full size, as opposed to the sword driver, which has a full size version, which I did not buy, because the fun of this for me is using it in the sword driver. A lot of the fun of this for me is just using it as a sword individually, summoning all the Seikens. However, it's also sword driver compatible. It takes everything I talked about with the sword driver earlier, the unsheathing of it, all of that, just carries over to this. So you get the satisfaction of unsheathing with a sword piece, blade, whatever, which is just so much cooler and so cool. As a brand new blade in the sword driver as well, it takes the Wonder Ride books, good old Wonder Ride books, does this thing. You're doing the same thing, but it's like so much more exciting because it's a whole new take on it because it's a whole new blade on it. We've never really had an aspect where it's the same gimmick you're using, it's the base form toy, but now part of the belt is different, like the weapon is different, so that changes the whole transformation, and it's like super cool. It's basically all the toys combined into one. So it's like, what's your favorite Kamen Rider Saber Seiken? All of them! Literally! And to top it all off, it's got my favorite jingle in all of Kamen Rider. So the Haoken Cross Saber easily comes in at the #1 spot as my favorite Kamen Rider Saber Seiken. Henshin! So that's my ranking of all the Sabers in... So that's my ranking of all the Seikens in Kamen Rider Saber. Thank you all so much for all the support on all these Kamen Rider Saber unboxing videos, even if this one's technically not an unboxing. They were always a blast to do, and I'm glad that some of you had the same excitement as I did, and I'm glad I was able to share my journey through this toy line, and one of the coolest parts of being a tokusatsu fan, which is the experience opening the toys for the first time. Once again, be sure to let me know your own rankings of these toys, check out all my other Saber videos, all my other Saber unboxings, any of my unboxings in general, any of my other rankings in general, my Patreon in general. It gives you exclusive access to early videos, behind the scenes content, and you get your name featured here at the end of the video. But if you don't want to do that, just make sure you're subscribed to this channel, and I hope to see you next time.